A lonely lady rancher came upon a native boy tied fast to a towering barrel cactus, bearing a chilling warning, "Traitor." Last of the Lightborn, the sun beat down on the parched floor of the Arizona Canyon, an ancient and unrelenting curse. A low wind snaked through the stones, carrying a fine red dust that clung to perspiration and sorrow with equal tenacity. A figure materialized from between the boulders, moving with a lean, unhurried gait like a fading memory. This was Eliza Riley, a woman in her early 40s, with skin tanned like weathered leather and eyes concealed beneath the frayed brim of an old cavalry Stetson she had worn since the day she abandoned Fort Mercer. She traveled by herself, the creak of her saddle marking each step of her tired Appaloosa, a rifle secured to her back and a revolver she hadn't missed within a decade at her hip. Far off, a thin wisp of smoke spiraled into the sky, perhaps a signal, or maybe just a desert mirage. Eliza had no faith in phantoms, but she firmly believed in omens, and this one reeked of bloodshed and unresolved matters. The ravine gave way to a desiccated riverbed, bordered by chala cacti and sharp limestone formations. It was there she saw him. A young man, bound upright to an enormous barrel cactus, his arms lashed with rawhide so cruelly that his wrists had turned a deep purple. Thorns had pierced through his tattered tunic, embedding themselves in his skin. His dark hair, matted with grime and blood, fell across eyes that were only partially open, teetering on the edge of consciousness. Eliza's breath hitched in her throat. She dismounted without a second thought, her boots crunching on the loose gravel. The ground around the cactus was stained dark. Nailed to a dead mesquite tree, a crude sign was scrawled with dried blood, "Traitor." Last of the Lightborn, she swallowed, a knot forming in her stomach. That was not a military term, it was tribal. Dine, more specifically. A sacred lineage, some old prophecy twisted into a method of execution. "God help you," she whispered, "what have they done?" The young man remained motionless, not even flinching as she drew her large knife and sliced through the bindings. His legs gave way, but she caught him before he could hit the ground. Even in his weakened state, his eyes snapped open, as sharp and dark as obsidian. He offered no tears, no pleas for help. "Easy now," Eliza said, gently lowering him to the sandy earth. "I'm not going to harm you." He only stared back, his gaze hollow and unwavering. His face was a study in strength, with high cheekbones, sun-bronzed skin, a defined nose, and a mouth set in a line of stubborn defiance. A trickle of blood ran down his shoulder where Cactus' spine still clung to his flesh. She took out her canteen and let a small stream of water fall onto his parched lips. He swallowed as if it caused him pain. "Do you have a name?" she asked. He gave no reply. "All right," she sighed. "We can talk later." She scanned the area. There were boot prints, from perhaps 5 or 6 men. Military issue, size 11s. Cavalry, most likely. They were fresh, made less than 2 hours ago. "The bastards are close," she muttered. Tearing a strip from her own shirt to dress his wounds, she noticed a necklace tucked into the collar of his tunic. It was a stone pendant, turquoise and carved into the shape of a heart, adorned with intricate symbols she did not recognize but felt were as ancient as the canyon itself. The heart of the mountain, possibly. There was no time to ponder it. He winced when her fingers brushed the pendant. "Didn't mean to," she said quickly. "Just patching you up." His voice, when it came, was raspy and toneless. "Your cavalry." Eliza froze. His voice wasn't broken or weak, just wary. She answered after a moment. "A long, long time ago." His lips twisted into something that was not a smile, but a grimace born of a painful memory. "Then maybe you should have left me here." Her jaw tightened. 10 years ago, maybe I would have." He stared at her intently. "So, what changed?" She offered no answer. Instead, she finished wrapping his shoulder with a clean cloth and said, "Come on. You're burning with fever. I have a place nearby." It took a considerable effort to get him onto her horse. She rode at a slow pace, holding him steady in the saddle with one arm. The heat was unforgiving, easily over 100 degrees where the sun hit, with the shadows offering little relief. Vultures circled high above, but they would not claim him this day. The abandoned mineshaft she called home was hidden behind a bluff near Dust Devil Ridge, deserted since the silver bust of '69. She laid him on a cot made of old army blankets and built a small fire to heat water. She crushed herbs she'd acquired from an Apache healer a few towns away, snakeweed and wild sage, and mixed them into a poultice with whiskey. She worked in silence, and he offered none of his own. As night descended, the howls of coyotes echoed from beyond the ridgeline. Finally, he shattered the quiet. You didn't ask what they were after. Eliza didn't look away from her task. I already know. That pendant. The heart of the mountain. He stared at the flickering flames. It is not a treasure. It is a key to what? To something your cavalry tried to bury. I am not cavalry folk, she said firmly. You wear the coat. She pulled the worn garment off right then and there, tossing it onto the dusty floor. Not anymore. His expression softened, just slightly. Then why are you helping me? She leaned back, the firelight carving deep shadows across her face. Because 10 years ago, I watched a village burn. I heard children screaming. I just stood there and did nothing. I still see their faces when I try to sleep. He blinked, as if weighing the truth in her confession. My father was the last of the Lightborn, he said. They murdered him for this pendant. She nodded slowly. And you're the next. He looked at her then, not as a soldier, but as a person. What's your name? Eliza Riley. I am Kai. They sat in a silence that was not empty, but filled with anticipation. You should get some rest, she told him. You're safe for now. He turned away. No one is safe. Not while he is still out there. Who? Silas Blackwood. Eliza stiffened. It was a name she hadn't heard in 8 years, belonging to a man with a perfectly pressed uniform and a voice laced with silver-tongued deceit. You know him? Kai asked. I served under him. Then you understand what he is capable of. She nodded grimly. I do. And I know he will not stop. He rolled onto his side, wincing in pain. Then don't you stop, either. Eliza stared into the flames, the ghosts of her past dancing once more, but this time they had his face. Get some sleep, she said at last. We ride tomorrow. Outside, the wind whipped against the canyon walls. In the dirt just beyond the mine entrance, a fresh boot print was visible. Military grade. Blackwood had found their trail, and the desert sands were only just beginning to stir. Dawn broke in fractured lines of light through the mine's warped wooden beams, casting slivers of gold and shadow across Kai's face. The fire was long dead, but Eliza hadn't slept. She sat nearby, honing her old cavalry knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic whisper of the blade filling the silence, the kind of sound a person makes when they can't find the words for what is eating them alive. Kai stirred under the army blankets, his eyes fluttering open. For a fleeting moment, peace washed over him, until memory returned and his jaw tightened. Eliza didn't look up. I made coffee. It's potent enough to scald away grief. He sat up slowly, a pained expression on his face. I don't drink cavalry brew. She offered a slight, crooked smile, her gaze still averted. Good. That's a sign you're starting to heal. Kai observed her. In the morning light, she seemed older, not just in years but in the miles she had traveled. Scars mapped her forearms, some jagged from blades, others small and puckered from bullets. War had left its roadmap on her body. Perhaps that was why she preferred to ride alone. He accepted the offered tin cup without a word of thanks. A single sip made his face contort. She chuckled softly. Told you. A heavy silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but weighty. Then Kai spoke, his voice low. Did you know him? Silas Blackwood. Her jaw clenched. All too well. Kai stared into the cold fire pit. He arrived with 6 men. They burned everything. He declared the heart of the mountain was not for savages, that it was too powerful for heathen hands. Eliza flinched at the familiar rhetoric, words she had heard Blackwood spit at chiefs, women, and children as if it were gospel. My father, he continued, his hands trembling around the cup, he made an arrangement with the army. He gave them names, locations, all to protect me. But the protection expired. They called me the last of the Lightborn, said my very existence was a threat. Eliza finally met his gaze. Your father, what was his name? Ta-Nehis. He was a shaman and a warrior, I remember him, Eliza said softly. He treated the wounded on both sides during the fighting at Red Clay Crossing. He fed starving soldiers and was spat on for his kindness. Kai looked at her then, not with distrust, but with a flicker of recognition. You were with Blackwood at Red Clay. I was behind him, Eliza admitted, her voice thick with shame. Too afraid to step forward, he was quiet for a long moment. That is worse, I know. Later that day, as Eliza was cleaning her rifle and Kai was rebandaging his shoulder, a faint tremor vibrated through the ground outside. Horses. 6, maybe 7 riders, approaching with the slow, deliberate confidence of predators that know they have cornered their prey. Eliza moved to the wall, peering through a crack between the wooden boards. She didn't need a spyglass to recognize the man in the polished coat and bone-white gloves. Blackwood, she whispered. Kai's face drained of color, his hand flying instinctively to the turquoise pendant beneath his tunic. Eliza turned to him. Stay inside. Don't make a sound. If they try to force their way in, use the back shaft. Head east. There's a creek bed about half a mile from here and I'll stall them, she finished. Lie if I have to. He looked as if he wanted to protest but held his tongue, merely nodding. Don't trust a word he says. He speaks poison. I've heard his sermons before. Eliza stepped out into the blinding sun, raising a hand as the cavalry squad reined in their horses. Blackwood dismounted with a practiced, theatrical flourish, his boots gleaming like dark mirrors, a saber at his side more for ornament than for combat. His face was unchanged, clean-shaven, with cruel eyes that always seemed to be smiling, as if the devil had just shared a secret with him. Well, I'll be damned, Blackwood drawled. Eliza Riley. Still chasing phantoms in the dust, still killing them for pay. Eliza shot back. Blackwood smirked. Old habits die hard. Speaking of which, I'm hunting a fugitive. A native boy. Dangerous. Might have passed this way. Eliza shrugged, her expression unreadable. Haven't seen anyone but lizards and my own regrets. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Are you certain about that? Eliza held his gaze without blinking. Dead certain. The silence stretched, taut and threatening. One of Blackwood's men moved his hand toward his holster, but Blackwood stopped him with a raised hand. You know, Riley, the law is different out here. It doesn't apply the same way to them. You don't need to play the hero. Eliza's voice dropped, cold and hard. I'm no hero. Just tired of being a coward. Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. Careful now. That sounds an awful lot like treason. He swung back onto his horse. We will be back. Don't stray too far. When the dust from their departure had settled, Eliza let out a long, shaky breath. She turned to see Kai standing in the mine's entrance, his eyes stormy. You lied for me. Damn right I did. Why? Eliza stepped toward him, her voice low and intense. Because I've worn that uniform. I know what they do, and I know what they call justice. I'm not going to stand by and watch them take another innocent life. He studied her, searching her face. You think I'm innocent? I think you're a survivor, she replied. And that's a rare thing, worth saving. Something shifted in his eyes, like ice cracking over a long-buried ember. He walked past her and sat on the cot, his gaze fixed on the pendant in his hand. When I was a boy, he said, my mother told me the heart would guide the last lightborn toward justice. I always believed that meant vengeance. And now, he asked, meeting her gaze. Now, I'm not so sure. But I know Blackwood can't have it. Eliza nodded. Then we will keep it safe. He raised an eyebrow. We? She managed a small smile. Unless you prefer riding alone, he didn't reply, but for the first time, he didn't look like he was planning to run. Outside, the wind rose again, hot and dry, carrying promises that had yet to be broken. The days that followed felt as if they were carved from a different reality, quiet, strange, and intensely fragile. The mineshaft was no longer filled with just the sound of wind and solitude. It now held the echo of voices, the scuff of boots, and the soft creak of movement as Kai slowly paced, regaining his strength. The fever was gone, but the wounds on his back were still raw. Eliza tended to them each morning without speaking, her calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He no longer pulled away from her touch. On the third morning, as Eliza cooked a simple meal of beans and dried meat, Kai emerged from the mine's shadows, a thin blanket draped over his shoulders. His face was still drawn, but the suspicion in his eyes had been replaced by a weary clarity. "You still sharpen that knife every night," he stated, sitting on the edge of a barrel. She glanced up from the fire. "Old habits. Still expecting an ambush?" "Still hoping I'll be ready when it comes," he nodded, and after a moment of thought, he said, "Teach me." Eliza blinked. "Teach you what?" "To shoot. To fight. You called me a survivor." "Prove it." She looked at him for a long, silent moment, the fire crackling between them. "All right," she said finally. "But we start with the land." What came next was a peculiar rhythm of learning. At dawn, they would climb the ridges above Dust Devil Ridge. Kai moved with caution but with increasing confidence. He showed her how to read the earth, how a bent blade of grass signified a rabbit's passage hours ago, how the color of droppings could reveal a horse's health and direction, how the ripples in the sand told the story of the previous night's wind. "This land speaks," he told her once, kneeling beside a partial footprint. "Most people are just too loud to hear it." In return, Eliza handed him her revolver, a heavy six-shooter with a scratched ivory handle. "First lesson," she said. "It doesn't matter how fast your draw is if you don't have clarity in your gut." He squinted, his hands trembling as he held the heavy weapon. His first shot went wild, its echo ricocheting off a distant butte. "Good," she said. "You missed with feeling." Kai frowned. "You are a strange teacher," she smirked. "You are a strange student." By the fifth day, his aim had become steady and true. He never smiled, but sometimes, the corners of his mouth would turn up in a way that was almost the same thing. At night, they would sit by the fire and trade stories in hushed tones, stories about the stars, about their mothers, about the times they had nearly given up. Eliza learned his full name was Kai Shashiazi, Little Bear in the dying language. He learned she had once played the fiddle, before the war took her hands and remade them into instruments of violence. "I stopped playing the day we burned Clear Water," she confessed. "I didn't feel like I deserved music anymore." "You weren't the one who lit the match, but I didn't stop them either." He didn't offer absolution, but he did share the last piece of his fry bread, and in the quiet that followed, that was enough. One evening, Kai returned from gathering prickly pear with his breath caught in his throat. He stood frozen at the mine's entrance. There, etched into the rock wall in bold lines of charcoal and ochre, were symbols, Navajo sigils, painted with reverent care. The Yei spirits, their limbs arched in a gesture of blessing, a jagged sun, and beneath them, a vulture in mid-flight. "You drew these?" he asked. Eliza, seated with her canteen, simply nodded. "I copied them from a canyon wall a few days south of here. I thought they might bring you strength." He stepped closer. "That vulture, it is Sei Inilchai, or the soul carrier. You painted him flying free." Figured he deserved it. "Just like someone else I know." He looked at her then, his voice barely a whisper above the sound of the cicadas. "You have changed only because you allowed me to." Before another word could be spoken, Kai tensed, his eyes fixed on the sand outside. Boot prints. He ran to the entrance. The faint impression of heels pressed deep into the red earth. A man's stride. Not old tracks, but fresh ones, made only hours ago. "They are back," he whispered. Eliza scanned the horizon. "We don't have much time." That night, as they packed what little they had, Kai reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded piece of worn cloth. Inside, the turquoise pendant shone in the firelight. He placed it carefully on the wooden crate between them. "This is what he wants," he said. Eliza studied it. "What is it, really?" He took a deep breath. "The heart of the mountain is more than a relic. My ancestors believed it held a resonance, a vibration that connects our spirits to the land. Blackwood wants it for power, to sell it or twist its meaning. But for my people, it is a compass. For healing. For direction." Eliza was silent for a long moment. "We can't run forever," Kai said. I never planned to. His hand brushed against hers on the crate, a fleeting touch that was just enough. I want to stop him, he said, his voice firm. But not for vengeance anymore. She looked up. Then for what? For truth, Eliza exhaled slowly. Then we make our stand. And we do it on our terms. They spent the next 2 hours scratching maps into the dirt, marking out ravines, choke points, and blind corners. Kai suggested placing shards from a broken canteen along a western ridge to blind the riders at dusk. Eliza prepared snares and fashioned crude explosives from old mining charges. By midnight, their plan was etched into the earth like the very bones of the canyon. We'll face him at sunrise, Eliza stated. No, Kai replied, rising to his feet. We will face him as the sun bleeds away, at dusk. When the shadows are at their longest, Eliza nodded. Then we will fight as shadows, too. Before he tried to sleep, Kai stood at the entrance to the mine, his eyes tracing the constellations. He whispered an old dying prayer, a low, melodic sound woven with yearning. Eliza listened from the shadows, careful not to intrude. What did it mean? She asked softly. That I am ready to walk the path of my ancestors, he answered. He turned, his silhouette fierce and yet soft against the starlit sky, a contradiction as profound as the desert itself. He stepped beside her. Whatever happens tomorrow, we ride together, he interrupted, finishing her thought. Until the end, and for the first time since the war, Eliza believed in something more than just survival. She believed in redemption. Dusk fell upon the canyon with a weight that seemed to press on bone and breath. The sun, half devoured by the horizon, bathed the rocks in hues of gold and crimson, the colors of a final warning. Kai stood at the edge of a bluff, the turquoise pendant clutched tightly in his hand. Below, Eliza finished setting the last snare near the western pass, sweat soaking her shirt despite the cooling air. Silhouettes were moving in the gorge below them, 6 horses, perhaps 7. Blackwood was back, not to search this time, but to conquer. Kai's voice was a low whisper. Are you ready? Eliza loaded the last cartridge into her rifle. I've been waiting 10 years for this. They held their positions in silence as the riders drew closer. As the sun sank lower, spilling a river of orange light across their chosen battlefield, the ambush was sprung. When Blackwood's men entered the narrow gorge, Kai flashed a shard of mirror from behind a boulder. The blinding reflection struck the lead scout, causing his horse to rear and expose the group's flank. A heartbeat later, Eliza's rifle cracked, the sound thundering through the canyon. The scout crumpled to the ground. The remaining men scattered in confusion. Snare traps snapped shut, yanking one man from his saddle with a scream. Another rode blindly into a concealed ditch and crashed with a sickening thud. Kai moved like a phantom, his feet seeming to barely touch the stone as he circled the ridge and let out a sharp, piercing whistle, the call of the canyon kestrel. Eliza knew the signal. Blackwood had broken away from the chaos and was riding east, toward the mine. He's going for the pendant! Kai shouted. Eliza grabbed her revolver and ran. The mouth of the mine gaped like a dark wound. Blackwood stormed inside, saber drawn, his breathing ragged. He moved deeper, torches flickering around him, until he reached the central chamber where their supplies had been kept. The pendant lay on a rock in the middle of the room, apparently unguarded. He lunged for it. A sharp click echoed in the chamber. Don't, Kai said, stepping from the shadows, his revolver leveled at Blackwood's heart. Blackwood straightened slowly, his eyes glittering with malice. You've grown bold, little phantom, and you have run out of men. That's where you're mistaken. I have one man left to break. He turned, slowly raising his hands. Do you truly believe this will end as you imagine? No. But it will end as it must. Blackwood tilted his head. You want the truth, don't you? About your father? Kai's jaw was a hard line. He was no saint, Blackwood continued, his voice turning smooth and serpentine. Ta-Nehis, the revered shaman, the great healer. He came to me. He offered information, said he would trade the names of other Lightborn elders for one thing, your safety. Kai's hands began to tremble. You are lying, am I? He gave me a scroll with names. We burned 3 settlements because of what he provided. And in return, we spared 1 boy. Just 1. Kai stumbled back, the torchlight dancing on his face, illuminating the tempest gathering in his eyes. He could not. Eliza appeared in the doorway, her rifle raised but not aimed. Kai, don't listen to him, but he didn't seem to hear her, his mind reeling. Blackwood smiled. You were the price. The sole survivor. The bargain was fulfilled. Until he developed a conscience and tried to take it back. That is why we killed him. A sound escaped Kai, not a cry, but a silent, choked gasp, as if something sacred within him had just collapsed. You see now, Blackwood whispered. The heart of the mountain did not protect you. Your father's betrayal did. Eliza moved closer, placing a hand on Kai's shoulder. He's twisting the truth. That is what men like him do. Kai turned to her, his eyes searching hers for an answer. What if it is true? What if my father damned our people just to save me? Eliza's gaze did not waver. Then he did it out of love. And that does not make him a traitor. It makes him a father. Seizing the moment of distraction, Blackwood lunged. He grabbed the barrel of Eliza's rifle, wrenching it away, and drew his saber with his other hand. The blade sliced across Eliza's shoulder. She cried out, staggering back. Kai screamed. Blackwood reached for the pendant, but Kai was faster. He moved into the attack, his leaner frame weaving under the soldier's swing. He caught the hilt of the saber, twisting it sideways to lock Blackwood's wrist. With his other hand, he drove his elbow hard into Blackwood's throat. The man choked, stumbling. You are not worthy to touch it, Kai hissed. Blackwood fell to his knees, gasping. Eliza raised her revolver, blood streaming down her sleeve. Don't, Kai said. Eliza hesitated. He's a murderer, and I will not let him take my soul along with his. He turned back to Blackwood, who was now a broken figure, his fine coat torn, his pride in tatters. You don't win by breaking others, Kai said. You only win when you stop being broken yourself. He snatched the pendant from the rock and stepped away. Eliza looked at him, her heart pounding. In that moment, he was not just a survivor. He was a leader. A Lightborn. They left Blackwood in the mine, bound and defeated, to be collected by the sheriff of Chinnell. Eliza sent a coded message with a smoke signal, an old cavalry call still respected by the few honorable officers who remained. Justice would be served by the law this time. Kai was silent for hours, not until they were sitting once more on the ridge where they had first shared the quiet of the canyon. I believed in a man who never had to make hard choices, he said, his voice heavy. Now I know he bled for me in ways I can never fully comprehend. Eliza didn't reply. She simply handed him a small, carved bird from her steel bag. What is this? He asked. I made it years ago. I meant to give it to someone who reminded me why I should keep fighting. He turned it over in his hand. It was a kestrel, its wings outstretched. Thank you, he said. They watched the stars emerge, soft and slow, and in that quiet sky where ghosts had once circled, there was now only the sound of healing. They walked side by side as the first light of dawn washed over the horizon, as soft as a breath and as golden as forgiveness. The wind was still. There was no more smoke, no more blood, only their footprints pressed into the sand behind them, 2 sets of tracks weaving together, like the story they now owned. Kai didn't speak at first, he simply walked, the turquoise pendant now secured in a leather pouch that rested against his heart. His fingers would occasionally touch it, not for a sense of power, but for the weight of memory. Eliza walked beside him, also silent, her hand still bandaged from their final fight, the other resting near the grip of her revolver more from habit than fear, a habit that, like many others, she was slowly unlearning. They did not look back. At the base of Juniper Ridge, the sheriff from Chinnell was waiting with 2 deputies and a prisoner carriage. Blackwood was inside, manacled and bruised, but alive. The smug superiority that had once defined his features was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness, the silence of a man who knew the war was over, and he had lost not just a battle, but the very myth of himself. The sheriff, a weathered man named Otis Redhill, tipped his hat to Kai. Mr. Yazzie, he said with respect. Do you wish to press charges? Kai shook his head. I want the truth to speak louder than revenge. Otis nodded. Spoken like your father. Before it all went wrong, Kai met his gaze. Then help me make sure his story ends the right way. With a quiet salute, the sheriff signaled, and the carriage rumbled away down the canyon. Blackwood said nothing. He didn't dare. Later that day, Eliza and Kai went back to where it had all started, the mouth of the mine, the sacred hollow beneath the cliffs, and the solitary juniper tree whose gnarled trunk had withstood centuries of conflict and wind. Beneath it, they dug a small hole in the earth and, wrapping the heart of the mountain in a cloth woven with dying symbols of sun, stone, and spirit, they laid it to rest. This does not belong to men like him, Kai said, kneeling by the open ground. Not anymore. Eliza placed the last stone over the spot. Maybe it never did. They sat under the tree as the sun dipped low, bathing the canyon in amber light. A kestrel circled above, the same bird that had been their companion for days, or perhaps its descendant, reborn. Kai traced the new calluses on his palm, the dust still clinging to his skin. He broke something in me, he murmured. But I will not let it define me. You redefined it, Eliza said. You took his fire and turned it into your own light. He looked at her. And you? What will you do now that you're no longer chasing ghosts? She smiled, a small, honest expression. Maybe I'll plant something. 2 weeks later, stories began to circulate through the nearby villages about a pair who had purchased a tract of land at the edge of the old cavalry road. It wasn't much, just cracked earth, a broken fence, and a barn on the verge of collapse. But every day, Eliza hammered new planks into the structure, and every evening, Kai gathered seeds and pressed them gently into the soil. He told the earth stories as he worked, of storms, of fire, and of survival. I thought this land was dead, Eliza said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. It was just waiting for someone to listen, Kai answered. Inside the barn, they built shelves for jars of medicine, snakeweed, willow bark, purple sage. Kai's knowledge became his gift to the wanderers and the wounded. Eliza tended to the horses and mended saddles for weary travelers. Sometimes, they would just sit on the porch with mugs of strong, bitter coffee, allowing the silence to communicate what words could not. Children from the closest pueblo started to visit. One brought a hawk with a broken wing, another brought her grandmother's cracked beads. Kai taught them how to read the clouds and how to sit still enough to hear the hum of the earth beneath the stone. Eliza taught them how to hold a rifle without being afraid of it, and more importantly, when to set it down. At night, under a full moon, Kai would trace patterns in the dirt, spirals of sand that mirrored the shape of his dreams. Eliza would watch him from the porch, a guitar across her knees, her fingers plucking melodies she thought she had forgotten. She never asked what he was drawing. She didn't need to. Then one morning, months after Blackwood had been tried and sent to prison at Fort Sumner, a letter arrived, stamped with the seal of the Bureau of Western Affairs. It was addressed to Mr. Kai Yazzie and Miss Eliza Riley, guardians of the ridge. Inside was a single sentence, *, the land known as Juniper Hollow is hereby recognized as protected cultural heritage under Article 9 *. Kai folded the letter carefully and set it beside the jar where he kept a lock of his mother's hair. He did not cry. He simply nodded. I think we have finally made it home, he whispered. Eliza grinned. Took a war, 3 bullets, and half a canyon, but yeah. This feels like home. One evening, as the sun slid behind the distant mesas, casting everything in a molten glow, Eliza rose from the porch and walked toward Kai, who was kneeling by the garden beds. She offered him her hand. He looked up, his brow furrowed. What is this? A dance. There is no music. She tilted her head. There is always music out here. You just have to listen. He took her hand. They danced, slowly and clumsily, barefoot on the packed earth. The wind provided a soft, haunting melody. The stars blinked on above them, one by one. There was no ceremony, no spoken vows, just 2 souls who had been marked by time, by loss, and by forgiveness, quietly and fiercely choosing to continue their journey side by side. The next morning, Eliza woke to find Kai already outside, watching the sunrise. His profile was sharp against the burning sky, a strong, proud, and unyielding. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He didn't turn. "That we are not finished. There are other villages, other children with names like mine who were left behind." She came to stand beside him. "You want to go?" "I want to help," she nodded, a smile touching her lips. "Then we pack tonight. We leave at first light." He finally turned to face her. "You're not tired of running?" She looked out across the sand, where 2 horses stood, saddled and ready. "We're not running anymore," she said. "We're riding." And when they rode out that morning, with dust trailing behind them, their hearts open and their names whispered on the wind, they were not just Eliza and Kai. They were hope. They were proof. They were an eternal mark upon the sand.